Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.
Open, or does anybody have any issue?
Room 29. Sound.
And in public session, thank you, folks. So I'm just going to provide a brief overview of today's business. The committee will receive oral evidence on the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review from the Department for Infrastructure. We're going to consider information on a statutory instrument, consider one statutory rule subject to assembly procedure, consider one proposal for a statutory rule not subject to assembly procedure, consider written updates on the Northern Ireland Concessionary Fares Scheme, the outcome of the consultation on the emissions test for light vehicles with new diesel engines, and the outcome of the consultation to correct a gap in legislation regarding the recognition of EEA licences. And we are going to receive oral evidence on the termination of the vehicle testing equipment contract from the Driver and Vehicle Agency in closed session. So inform those in attendance, anyone in the public gallery can use a mobile phone device through a Wi-Fi connection. All devices should be muted. Password details are available on the gallery rules for anybody wanting to connect to the Wi-Fi network. 3G, 4G and 5G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. So if members are content, we'll proceed through the agenda as follows. Apologies, Peter McReynolds will attend the meeting via Zoom. I don't think there's any other apologies at this stage. No. Okay, declarations of interest remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any member have any interest they wish to declare? I have two, which is there is correspondence just in relation to unadopted developments. I live in an unadopted development, unfortunately, and just that I do have relatives that work within DVA. Okay, any others? Yeah.
I have a diesel car just with regard to emissions.
Yeah, so do I. I have a diesel car too.
Band well.
Yeah. Okay, did we get that? Everybody who has a diesel car. Okay. Okay, there you go.
Fair enough. That's the weirdest declaration of interest.
Thanks, folks. Chairperson's business. Advise members that you have received a request to meet. I received a request to meet with Matt Bruce, Director of Finance at the Financial Conduct Authority, along with the chairpersons of the Economy and Justice Committee to discuss motor insurance. It's hoped that the meeting will be held on the 12th of November, and I'll obviously subsequently inform the committee of any key issues discussed, because it is a big area and topic of discussion amongst constituents. So content with that?
Absolutely, Chair. I mean, there's a lot of questions being asked, so it'd be good to have that report back, yeah. Okay,
thank you. So item 4 is draft minutes. At page 7, the draft minutes of proceedings for the meeting on the 23rd of October 2024. I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 23rd of October 2024. And if so, I'll sign the minutes now. Content?
Great.
Thank you. Okay, matters arising, there are none. Item 6 is correspondence. At page 21 you'll see the correspondence memo. At page 26, item 6.3, you'll see the Minister for Infrastructure response regarding delays in discharging planning conditions. And 4 members of the Minister have provided high-level data on the numbers of discharge of planning conditions received, decided, withdrawn and the average processing times. The Minister has advised that as local councils process over 99% of the planning applications, more information on new homes or developments impacted by delays in the discharge of planning conditions will be held by them. So I'm seeking agreement to request information on delays in the discharging planning conditions from local councils, including the number of new homes and developments affected and the reasons for delay. Are you happy with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. At page 257, item 6.16, you'll see correspondence from the Law Society for Northern Ireland regarding regional property certificates. Advised members that the Law Society has advised of its concerns regarding the content of regional property certificates, the differences in responses received to those certificates, and that it is not always clear if a bond is in place or not. An example is provided whereby one solicitor received different responses for 2 properties on the one development. The Law Society advises that they are increasingly receiving queries from their members, and they are concerned about whether they are able to rely on the content of property certificates and that any bond in place is sufficient. The Law Society has offered to meet the committee to discuss the issues further. So I'm seeking agreement that in the first instance we forward the correspondence to the department for their response on the issues that are contained and raised by the Law Society, and also to ask the committee if they want to consider a formal oral evidence session from the Law Society, because it is something I think is quite pertinent. So are members content with that? Yep. Yeah, okay, thank you. Page 3 of the table papers, item 6.19, inform members that the clerk to the Committee for Finance has forwarded a copy of the Finance Minister's urgent oral statement on the Chancellor's budget announcement. I'm asking members if they are content to note the correspondence. Okay, thank you. At page 17 of the table papers, item 6.20, refer members to an invitation to the Driving the Future Today event, which will take place on the 14th of November. Any member wishing to attend should respond to the organisers directly. And I'm just asking now members if they have any comment that they wish to raise on any other item of correspondence. Okay, thank you, members. I'm seeking agreement that members are content to note the correspondence and the remaining suggested actions as contained in the correspondence memo in the meeting pack. Content? Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item 7 now, which is All Island Strategic Rail Review, Department for Infrastructure oral evidence. At page 293, you'll see the Clerk's memo. At pages 296 to 301, Department for Infrastructure written paper and annexes. And at page 302, you'll see the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review final report. So I'm welcoming to the committee Jackie Robinson, Director of Transport Regulation and Public Transport, Linda Buick, Head of Public Transport Strategy Branch, and Claire McKeown, Public Transport Strategy Branch. You're very welcome to our committee meeting today. This report has been well read by, I know, a number of people, so I'm looking forward to your evidence. I'm just seeking agreement that evidence is recorded by Hansard today. All content?
Great.
Yep.
Okay, so I would just invite you to make a brief opening statement of about 5 minutes, and then I'm keen to come to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would like to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to brief you today on the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review. The Rail Review, which is the first strategic review of rail of its kind on the island of Ireland, was announced jointly by Minister Mallon and Minister Ryan in 2021. And we developed it in partnership with our colleagues in the Department of Transport in Dublin, with input from key stakeholders including TransLink, Irish Rail and the National Transport Authority. The review sought to identify where the potential to improve and enhance rail services lay, and through an evidence-based assessment, developed a vision for a future rail network which would deliver on the goals of the review. Those goals included decarbonisation, intercity connectivity, regional and rural accessibility, and sustainable mobility. As part of the evidence-based approach, a high-level economic appraisal was carried out to help ensure that the review's recommendations represent value for money. The final review report was published in July this year, as you well know, and includes 32 recommendations which, if delivered in full, will transform rail services across this island through improvements such as new and reopened rail routes, higher speeds, increased frequencies, additional capacity, and will connect more communities to the rail network in the process. For Northern Ireland specifically, this will include new rail lines from Portadown to Armagh, Lisburn to Antrim, Belfast to Newry, and Portadown to Derry, Londonderry. It will include new cross-border routes from Portadown to Mullingar and Derry, Londonderry to Letterkenny, as well as new and improved rail connections to our airports, increased frequency and faster journey times. The review report sets out a roadmap for delivering these transformational interventions over 3 time periods, up to 2030, 2030 to 2040 and out to 2050, and in doing so it provides a framework for future investment decisions. But more detailed work will, however, be needed to prioritise and test the feasibility and the affordability of the recommendations. The Minister is keen to deliver the ambitions of the Rail Review and is committed to progressing what he can in the remainder of the current mandate. Developing the recommendations will be challenging, and the Department will need to explore all avenues for funding, given the importance of this work in terms of economic activity, connectivity, regional balance and the environment. We recognise, as does the Minister, that many people will be disappointed over the omission of Fermanagh from the Rail Review, and he is committed to addressing regional imbalance. He will continue to explore opportunities to improve travel options for the citizens in Fermanagh. And the development of the Regional Strategic Transport Network Transport Plan and the Fermanagh and Omagh Transport Plans offer opportunities to consider the transport needs of the people of Fermanagh and how we best meet those needs. These new plans are being developed over the period up to 2035 and will review transport needs on a multimodal basis. In addition, a new recommendation to update the review every 10 years has been included in the final report. This new recommendation will provide regular opportunities to reconsider the case for rail connectivity to Fermanagh over the review time period, allowing updated population growth figures and any new policy developments to be taken into account. Turning briefly to the next steps. Rail services on the island are already being developed towards the report's vision. Last week we saw the introduction of an hourly train service between Dublin and Belfast, while the procurement process has already started for the new, faster, more sustainable enterprise train fleet from Belfast to Dublin. The Department of Transport has secured support from the European Investment Bank Advisory Service to help progress implementation of the Rail Review's recommendations. And with the assistance of those EIB consultants, we are working with the Department of Transport colleagues, with TransLink, Irish Rail and NTA to consider the recommendations and identify those rail interventions which could be well advanced or delivered over the next decade. TransLink have a number of feasibility studies linked to the recommendations of the review already underway, and they are due to report in spring or summer of next year. These include 4 which were funded from Union Connectivity Development Fund. They are the reopening of the Antrim-Belfast line with a link to the airport, the Armagh-Portadown line, electrification of Belfast to the border, and an initial feasibility on the proposed Portadown Derry/Londonderry line. Chair, that's a very quick summary of the report and our consideration of the next steps, and we're welcome any questions.
10 gold stars, because that's 5 minutes on the dot, so there you go. Luke, thank you very much for coming to the committee today. So I'll just come straight to questions. What specific recommendations does the department consider will be most beneficial to Northern Ireland?
I think if we look at all the recommendations, they combine a variety of things, from reopening new rail lines to increase speed. And I think one of the primary things that we will be looking at going forward is the decarbonisation. With decarbonisation, we get a climate benefit. We also get increased speeds on some of our lines. In reality, it will be a combination of lots of interventions which will help develop our rail network. So I wouldn't specifically say any one until obviously the work of the EIB consultants are completed.
Okay, so then what specific recommendations does the department not agree with or does not believe is going to be deliverable?
From the point of view of all the recommendations, these are an evidence-based piece of work that were done by consultants. Each of them will be looked at, and we will look at the feasibility of them. We will look at the viability from a business case perspective. So at this stage, we're not ruling anything out which is included within those recommendations.
So then you agree with the fact that Fermanagh has been left out?
I wouldn't say that Fermanagh has been left out. At this stage, Fermanagh hasn't been included. But whenever
10 years?
At this stage, Fermanagh hasn't been included. As you allude to, the report recommendations and the final report recommendations included a new recommendation, which was that we would do stage reviews every 10 years. That will allow us to conclude on relation to population and how beneficial rail lines to Fermanagh might be. Whenever we were looking at the report in general, the high-level economic appraisal for Fermanagh and the BCR in particular was very, very poor, and it wouldn't have been economically viable. If we consider this as a package of measures and what we want to do, that wouldn't be one of the first ones that we would consider at the current time frame. But there are lots of other options, and one of them was putting a transport hub in Omagh with flexible bus connections throughout Fermanagh, which would between Omagh and Fermanagh then, which would still give access to a rail link in Omagh.
Omagh is in Tyrone.
But it would give good connections to Fermanagh residents.
Well, how realistic then is it to expect that the cost benefit analysis will change by the time the first update of the review in 10 years' time comes around?
I wouldn't try and estimate what's going to happen in 10 years, to be honest with you. That will be another evidence-based review, looking at population, looking at policy changes to then. And if you bear in mind that we will have the RST-NTP in place by then, which will already have looked at multimodal transport options, we will also have the Fermanagh and Omagh transport plan in place. And I think all of those, whenever we look at them in a holistic way, will give a good evidence base. And at that stage, we won't be looking back. We will be looking forward. And I can't tell you in 10 years' time how realistic it would be, to be honest.
So you talked about the development of the transport plan in Fermanagh. gives, as far as, correct me if I'm wrong, if my memory serves me right, it was just whenever you were talking there, I did take a look through that transport plan this summertime. I don't believe it actually talks about rail anywhere in that development plan. How long is that development plan to last for then in terms of transport?
So the development plan, the Fermanagh Noma development plan goes out to 2035, and the regional strategic. So the Fermanagh Noma plan will not look necessarily at rail. The regional strategic transport plan will look at multimodal, so it will look at the strategic network, which will include rail. So the two of them together will hopefully provide answers in relation to multimodal transport.
So you can see my cynicism then whenever I think about the transport plan and looking at 10 years' time, and the fact that the transport plan doesn't even include some, you know, like we will be potentially looking at this in 10 years' time whenever it has a time frame of 2035. You can sort of see my cynicism there.
Would it help if maybe I go back and explain how the consultants got to the point where they did?
I think, to be fair, it is contained quite a bit within, but if you could briefly touch on that, yes, but I think it is widely contained within the report itself.
Okay, well, as a starting point, the consultants identified a long list of potential interventions. So these were drawn from information on the ground, from the project team that were looking at it, from the high-level steering group that I was a member of, and from feedback during that initial public consultation stage. So following that, interventions were that were outside the scope of the review were sifted out. So that was the likes of commuter services. Interventions which didn't serve the strategic movement corridors and connectivity opportunities identified at an early stage of the review were also sifted out, and those that didn't align with the existing policy. Any that would have an adverse environmental impact on areas of outstanding natural beauty were also sifted out, as were interventions which targeted towns or areas with very low potential demand. So interventions were then subsequently combined into 7 key packages. And prior to this, all the interventions were assessed against the goals and objectives of the review, and the packages were then assessed at economic appraisal stage. So the economic appraisal included consideration of the costs, the benefits, and this showed that while some packages performed well, others didn't. So the project team then combined the best performing elements of each of those 7 packages and formed an 8th package. So the rail line from Enniskillen to Omagh was assessed as one of the individual 7, or as one of the 7 packages, but was not selected going forward because it was just not one of the best performing. And if we look at the cost-benefit analysis of that, the cost-benefit analysis was showing a ratio of about 0.1, and we would look at a cost-benefit ratio of about 1 for economic benefit. The cost of a rail line between Omagh and Fermanagh, which is a single line between Enniskillen and Omagh, single line track of 40 kilometres, is approximately £335 million. So it was on that basis that it hasn't gone forward at this stage. As I say, in relation to what's going to happen in 10 years' time, that will all be reassessed, and will be reassessed based on what has happened between now and then as well.
So I'm speaking, obviously, I'm chair of the committee, but I'm also a DUP for Man and South Drone MLA. We are so keen to ensure that there's decarbonisation and modal shift. I really do think this was a missed opportunity in terms of an area, a council area, that has one of the highest proportions of car usage. And one of the key areas of this is decarbonisation. I think it was a real missed opportunity. Understand how consultants have reached there, but I think from a departmental point of view, who aren't consultants, I do think it's a missed opportunity to miss Fermanagh out of that. There was one question I wanted to come to before other members, and that was around, we've seen with the likes of the A5, the issues around land and development of infrastructure projects. So when you're looking at feasibility and increasing our rail, are you also looking at planning in terms of land which may be needed for the development of rail, particularly even when you're looking at you know, you've talked about the different timescales there of 10 years each between. So
the Rail Review did recommend safeguarding corridors and key stations to ensure that corridors within the review period were protected to accommodate new rail lines. The development of the council's local development plans provide an opportunity for councils to safeguard disused transport routes for future transport purposes. And at this stage of development of those local policy plans, which deal with land use and zoning, councils can identify the precise disused routes. And the development of those transport plans by the department also offer an opportunity to assess the need for continued protection of such routes. And they will be considered within the LPP process.
okay, thank you, Vice Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation and your answers so far. Just first of all, there's obviously quite a high level of priorities based across a number of years in this plan. In terms of assessing them, is that done on need, cost, or economic impact, and how do you triage those priorities triaged in terms of what would be delivered in which order?
So are you talking about how the phasing of this?
Yes.
I'll maybe turn and ask
In terms of the
Glenn
phasing, yes, and how it looks and how
so
that
what
was
you're
thought
talking
out.
about is what we deliver in what the report would have considered the short, medium and long
Exactly.
term. And a lot of the work we're doing with the EIB is going to help us do that. But Linda, do you want to come in?
So since the report was published in July this year, we've been working with our colleagues in the Department of Transport. So they secured support from the European Investment Bank Advisory Service to appoint a team of consultants to look at kind of the next steps. So we're working with our DOT colleagues, TransLink, Irish Rail and NTA with the EIB consultants. And so that has involved, first of all, identifying what is already being committed in each jurisdiction up until this point, and then looking at the interventions, the recommendations in the review. The initial focus will be on what could potentially be delivered by 2035, and that's looking again just at what would be involved in that, what the sequencing of those would be, when you might, if you want to deliver by 2035, when you might need to, have received all the necessary approvals, etc. So that will, the roadmap that's in the rail review, that will kind of set out in a little bit more detail those projects that might be delivered or else well advanced by 2035, and then the next piece of work then will be looking out to kind of 2050. But that's kind of the first stage. But as the rail review has highlighted, each of these recommendations will be subject to feasibility studies to kind of look into more detail to see, look at demand, the exact routes and all of that. So there's kind of a number of stages that all of this will need to go through. But that EIB work is kind of the first one that will help set out what those initial projects that could be delivered by 2035 might be.
Okay. There's potential that the project could have a really high economic impact value, but there's no budget for it, so effectively it doesn't make it onto the table in that respect, or has a high climate impact, but because it's not affordable, it doesn't score as highly. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I guess it will be looking at, like the rail review has set out a roadmap, so it has identified, out to 2030, between 2030 and 40 and 2040 to 50, and I guess that was looking at, the kind of the scale of the projects, how long it might take to deliver them, etc., and what might be needed for that. So, but probably all the recommendations in the review will have their own benefits. All of them were assessed against the goals of the review. So each of them will deliver, economic benefits, climate benefits as well. So it'll kind of try to look at both, but take deliverability into account as well within that time frame.
Okay, well, just to touch on two of those, and one of them is the electrification of the line, and I know that our lines here are the worst in Europe, I believe, when it comes to the lack of electrification so far. So just talk us through the feasibility work that's been done on that so far, a time frame, if you will, and implicated costs. Is there any assessment of those things yet?
So in relation to the electrification, as I've already mentioned, there is a feasibility study that TransLink are doing at the minute, looking at the feasibility between Belfast and the border, specifically in relation to the enterprise. Part of the work that the European Investment Bank are doing will be a decarbonisation strategy for the island of Ireland, and that's important because it gives a roadmap for us across the island, and we do have cross-border services, so it's important to make sure that we have that as a building block going forward. In relation to the costs of what that might look like, I don't have those costs to hand. So sorry, I really can't answer that one. If you want, we'll try and come back.
To us. I'm just trying to get how feasible that potentially is.
It's I suppose one of the things that we want to look at, and it goes back to the prioritisation question as well, is what the time frame and how deliverable things are. So one of the things that will, if we look at Belfast, Dublin, electrification will definitely help with journey times, but one of the other things that will help is for tracking of the lines from Dublin North, because if you're on the Enterprise, you quite often find that the interactions between the DART and the Enterprise mean that services can be delayed. So that's a fundamental thing that may happen in Ireland, but will ultimately help the rail connectivity between Belfast and Dublin as well. So it's that wider prioritisation piece that EIB will help us look at too.
Okay, and the final one, Chair, for me then, is just around the accessibility to our airports. Obviously, we have very limited access when it comes to rail, in fact, none to both the international and the Londonderry Airport. So in terms of assessments of that portion of work, the feasibility, the cost and the time frame, is there any indication of that? I think the economic impact of those could be significant.
So there is a feasibility study ongoing on reopening the Knockmore line, which is the line between Lisburn and Antrim, and part of that work will look at a spur going to the international airport. I don't know, that is due to report around about springtime, so hopefully we'll hear more details of that at that stage, and that will give a better indication of how you link into the airport, what other stops might be along that line, and the cost of doing that. So at this stage I don't have that information. In relation to City of Derry Airport, as you're probably well aware, there is upgrade of the line from the existing line between Belfast and the northwest, and one of the feasibility studies in relation to the next stage of that is looking at where there may be stops, and one of the stops being considered, it would be at Eglinton City of Derry Airport.
Thank you.
Cahill?
Thanks, Chair. And Jackie, you're welcome back. Thanks very much for the presentation. Just a couple of comments, really. Obviously, I welcome the new hourly service between Dublin and Belfast, but my key point, obviously, is the Armada Portadown stuff. And just would you like to, can you comment further on that, on the vision for that, please?
So on the Armagh Portadown line, as you'll be aware, the department funded a feasibility study, or part funded with the council in the area, a feasibility study. So an initial feasibility study into that line has been undertaken. The work that TransLink are now doing is a more detailed, so feasibility studies happen in a couple of stages. So the first one is a very high level review of just how feasible it is. This next one will actually look at what the route should be, and just how easy or difficult that's going to be, and will give us a potential cost of it as well. So that work is ongoing, and I keep saying everything is due in spring, summer of next year. They're probably all somewhere between the first and second quarter of next year, but again, spring, summer is the best time frame I can give you for that feasibility study too.
And it'll be much welcome, Chair. I mean, there's a strong lobby group there, as you know, lobbying a long number of years, but yeah, I certainly welcome that. I feel sorry for the Chair over her way, but they've been fighting hard for that, but it's most welcome,
Thank you, Chair, yeah. Thank you, Cahill. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks, for the presentation. Just staying on the theme of airport connectivity, I think I do welcome the commitment in it. Clearly, with a number of airports, and particularly on the George Best Belfast City Airport, I'm keen to hear a bit more about that. Obviously, the current dangerous situation where passengers from across the world in Europe are travelling along up the Sydenham bypass, often in poor weather conditions. I'm sure you've seen it yourselves. Just what is the time frame for action on this, on improving the Sydenham station particularly? I know it is a priority and it is in writing here in front of us, which is good to see, but I suppose just to establish what level of priority is this, and is this in the spring commitment as well, or will we see action on this within the next reasonable time?
This is another feasibility study that TransLink have ongoing at the minute, which is looking to improve pedestrian access at George Best City Airport, and whether that would be best done at an existing halt or a new halt. So that's currently being looked at, and again, that's the report early next year.
And is there nothing further on that, in terms of time frame or level of priority? Is it relatively realistic? And
I think one of the things that we'll have to look at with that is the cost of it, and what the best option is, and that's obviously what the feasibility study is going to look at. So it's about, as you mentioned, the safety in travelling, as in pedestrians travelling. So there are potentially options in a new halt, or using an existing halt and using, if we look at examples around the world where we have people movers, or bus connections, or other options. So all of those the feasibility of all of those options, and the cost benefit analysis will be taken into account in that.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to more progress on that. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Chair.
Stephen. Andrew?
Yeah, two quick questions really. Just on your point there about improving connectivity, I'm just is there thoughts going into improving like bus connections to the trains, the new train stations, as well as greenway cycle infrastructure into these train stations? That's number one question. I'll just run both together, just on account of the chair. And the second one was, it references in the report a £17 billion boost to the island. I'm just wondering, is there like a Northern Ireland specific sort of aspect to that stimulus? Is there any financial number attributed to that? Thank you.
So I'm going to take the second one first, because I'm not sure of the answer, and I don't know, Linda, whether you are, whether that figure has been broken down to Northern Ireland specific. I don't think it has, so I don't have that information. In relation to multimodal journeys, really, and connectivity, the vision of the department would be that we would have transport hubs with multimodal connections between them. I think if we look at Grand Central Station, that's the first one that we've started to see. We are going to see more active travel links into it. We're going to see better pedestrian access into it as well. Part of the future development that we'll see over the next year at that site is, for example, bike hire. So we'll have the public bike hire available there. We'll potentially have car hire, car club type things available there as well, as taxi stops. So that's just one example of that. I think as the department rolls out and we look at these transport plans going forward, that we will be looking at that, and it is definitely something that is fairly high on the priority list.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, ladies, just to welcome you and welcome progress to date. This is this All Ireland Strategic Rail Review, so on my party had championed for a long time, and I'm glad to see it get to this stage, but it's now how we move beyond this stage and to actual delivery, that's where we'll have the real proof of the pudding. It said there, I think it was that the Minister's keen to see progress, as much progress as possible in the rest of this mandate, which is another 2.5 years. I was wondering, realistically, how you think that progress will look. What would you envisage could be done in that time? I know we're talking about another review or relook in 10 years. I don't know how much will be done between then and now, and the Chair described herself as cynical. I think maybe even more so at times, and a lot of that's based on delays we've seen to previous commitments on rail in my own neck of the woods as well. But given the costs identified, and we're looking in total at 29 billion between now and 2050 at 2023 prices, the biggest driver of cost is delay, so we really need to get on the ground as soon as possible if we're to do this as efficiently as possible. Where do you see the priorities in terms of what can be delivered fast?
So what can be delivered fast in relation to the rail network? It's difficult to deliver fast. We're talking about major build schemes in most areas, unless we are reopening. And
it says first instead of fast.
So there's a number of things that we can do, and they will include things like building capacity on the network, increased frequencies of trains, and we've also, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, we have a number of feasibility studies ongoing. if we have a pipeline of work, so as those feasibilities start to progress, and although I've mentioned at least 4 feasibility studies, they are all at a different stage. So we talked about the Portadown to Armagh one. That's a much more detailed feasibility than, for example, the one that's currently being done on the Portadown to Northwest Hub, because that's a very initial stage feasibility study. So we are already starting to see a pipeline of things that are in development and at feasibility stage. The work that EIB will help us to do will be to prioritise that over the next 10 years, and I think that will help us focus. But you're right, one of the big and challenging things around this is going to be finding the money to do it. And we will be looking towards all sources of funding, whether that's potentially union connectivity or UK funding, whether that's shared island funding, or whether that's funding from the executive. And I know how challenging that is going to be over the next number of years. But as we come forward with firm proposals, once those feasibility studies are concluded, then we will be able to do that with a level of confidence in the figures. At the moment, we probably don't have that. But one of the first things that I would say that we will be looking and prioritising will be the decarbonisation and the electrification.
Yeah, I also share the Chair's frustration, I suppose, that
Mark, if you don't mind, could you come to your question as quickly as you could, please? But
hasn't
yes.
gone as far into the west as we would have liked, either in terms of Fermanagh and indeed Sligo. Would you share my concern? You mightn't view it as a concern, though, that the low-hanging fruit or the early spend and targets on this will be based in and around Belfast, given that's where the services and structures are currently based. It is an all-island rail review, and we want to see connectivity from all parts of the island, particularly those that have been underserved.
Yeah, and I think we can join that up. So if we think about the Portadown to Armagh line, that's in preparation for links into Mullingar. If we think about the Portadown to Northwest route, that's with the start of Lincoln to Letterkenny as well. So we are already starting to think about those cross-border routes. We will continue to do that, and we will continue to do that with our southern counterparts, because I do think you're right. I think it's on an all-island basis. But where we're thinking about best value for money, getting more people access to rail, and those will happen in centres of population, and rail is best served or best serves mass transport with large numbers of people moving, and we need to balance that out.
Yeah, and finally, one of the feasibility studies you mentioned was on the Derry-Coleraine line and additional or potential for additional halts along there at City of Derry Airport, at Strathfoyle and at Eglinton. That's predicated though on the delivery of Phase 3 that we've seen slip at Phase 3 of the Derry-Coleraine line. I don't know if you're in a position to give an update on where that's at currently.
So in relation to that, that programme is like an enhancement programme. So it's a collective of rail infrastructure work, and it will help hopefully to maximise the potential and efficiencies of the service. So at the moment they're looking to maximise the opportunities, obviously, for greater connectivity, increase the journey times or decrease the journey times, and potentially the provision of the new halts. So that will require, if we're looking at new halts, that will require passing loops and line speed enhancements. And Translink are planning to submit a strategic outline case to the department in relation to that by summer 2025.
Thank you.
Okay, Cathal, you were looking in just
quickly on the feasibility studies, because it's important, but they're designed to do a certain thing. My question is this: we need to be looking outside the box in terms of the challenges. Then it's not just about the straightest route to get from point A to point B. And those conversations about the challenge, maybe in planning or dealing with communities or anything else, that has to be part and parcel of what the outcome hopefully will be. Because we need to learn from the past. That's all I'm saying. I take it that's part of the conversation as well.
And we will be having those conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other members who'd be glad to hear on the questions. But it was just be good. There's quite an awful lot there in terms of quite a few feasibility studies that are happening at the minute. So it'd be good to sort of get a breakdown and in terms of timescales when they will. I know you talked about spring and summer. But if we could get a breakdown of exactly the timescales of when those feasibility studies will come, and then in terms of the funding elements, you know, where those are likely to come from. I know there that you talked about the union connectivity as funding some of the feasibility studies, but then the outworkings of actually implementing those feasibility studies would be good to see some of the detail just in and around that, I think.
We will come back to you in writing on that. Just to caveat that a lot of these are a bit moving feast, so I'm unlikely to be able to come back with a specific date for feasibility studies to be finalised, but we'll do our best.
Super, thank you. I appreciate that. Can I just clarify there in terms of the union connectivity funding, how much you received for those feasibility studies?
Yes, and I think I have that. Have you got that information? I do have it somewhere in my packet. Yes, I've got it here. So, the electrification of the railway between Belfast and and the border was 3.3 million received. Reopening of the Knockmore Antrim line, it was a feasibility study of 0.7 million. Portadown to Armagh railway extension was 0.8. And the new line from Portadown to the northwest was 0.5 million. As I say, it was a very high level initial feasibility study for that one.
Okay, thank you. Well, like, no doubt, as I say, as the feasibility studies come back, you know, no doubt we'll have you again. And I look forward to seeing Fermanagh in 10 years' time being included, if not before. But look, thank you for your time today. We really do appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Was there anything anybody wanted to follow up on coming out of that? Bar some of those feasibility studies. Happy enough?
I think it's just important to keep the progress, you know, keep pushing for it rather than pushing everything back to spring or whenever. You know, just keep focused on
absolutely.
action.
Yeah, I think we all share that. Yeah, Mark?
And just again, questions around budget. You know, it's been broken down there that at today's prices or last year's prices, this is going to cost 0.3 billion per year. So we could find out from the department what they're hoping to put on it this year, next year, and the year after. Because the longer you leave it, the more that's going to go up.
And I think the prioritisation in terms of what do we give more weight to? What's the department giving more weight to? Are we giving more weight to development of the likes of, you know, during this budgetary constraint time period? You know, are we giving weight to development of this document, or are we going to see that money shifted somewhere else? I think as well. So, content with that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 8 is a statutory instrument, the Road Transport International Passenger Services Amendment Regulations 2024. At page 465, you'll see the Minister for Infrastructure correspondence, the Road Transport International Passenger Services Amendment Regulations 2024. So informing members that the Minister has advised that a statutory instrument will be made at Westminster to legislate for changes arising from the Government's accession to the Protocol to the European Union Interbus Agreement. This relates to occasional bus and coach services such as private tours and does not provide for scheduled regular or special regular services or permitted cabotage operations. Accession to this protocol will replace temporary arrangements that were provided by the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, TCA. The Minister has advised that the practical changes will be minimal as the temporary provisions in the TCA were drafted to mirror the structure and content of the protocol. Advise members that the Minister will bring the matter to the Executive for information, given that it is a cross-cutting in nature. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the correspondence or if they have any other information or clarification that they want to get. Happy to note?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm just
Mark.
wondering if the choreography around this has to now go to the executive, but does it come back to us at any stage? Do you know, I think we could do with just a wee bit more information about this.
Okay.
I'd be more comfortable
Okay.
with further information about the impact on tours that
Yeah. We'll
are
make-
occasional, but we'd like to see more frequent, and you don't want to be.
In terms of just even layman terms, in terms of how it would actually operate on the ground. Okay. Yeah, we'll check that for you. Happy enough, folks?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Item 9 is SR 2024-178, the Trunk Road T3 Western Transport Corridor, Sion Mills North to Ballygawley West, Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 468 to 515, there's documents in relation to the statutory rule, and at page 21 of the table papers, you'll see the Examiner of Statutory Rules 26th report. The rule is subject to negative resolution, so inform members that this order provides that 55.75 kilometres of new road, including 7 new junctions, shall become Trunk Road and be part of the Belfast, Ballygawley, Londonderry Land Frontier Trunk Road T3, 0.35 kilometres of new road, including 1 new roundabout, shall become Trunk Road and be part of the Cookstown, Omagh, Enniskillen, Acklean Land Frontier Trunk Road T10. And 1.36 kilometres of new road shall become Trunk Road to be part of the Acklean, Ballygawley, Enniskillen, Belcoo Land Frontier T6. In addition, the order also provides for the stopping up of certain roads. The proposed length of the road to be constructed is a high standard dual carriageway and will have no private accesses, no central reserve crossovers and a limited number of junctions. The local roads will not be connected to the dual carriageway but will be taken over or under the new road or stopped up. So I remind members that the committee agreed it was content with the proposal for the statutory rule at its meeting on the 9th of October. Inform members that the Examiner of Statutory Rules had no comments to make on the technical aspects of the statutory rule. So are members content with the statutory rule? Agreed, yeah. So I'll read the motion that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2024-178, the Trunk Road T3 Western Transport Corridor, Sion Mills North to Ballygawley West, Order Northern Ireland 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Okay, thank you, folks. At page 516, you'll see the SR 2024-184, the private accesses on A5 Western Transport Corridor, Sion Mills North to Ballygawley West, stopping up Order Northern Ireland 2024. Advise members that the cover letter at page 516 incorrectly states that the SR 2024-184 is subject to negative resolution. It is not subject to assembly procedure and is not required to be laid. So I remind members that the committee agreed on the 9th of October that it was content with the proposal for the statutory rule. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the SR 2024-184, the private accesses on A5 Western Transport Corridor, Sion Mills North to Ballygawley West, stopping up Order Northern Ireland 2024. Great, yeah, thank you. Okay, at page 525, you'll see the request to meet with the committee from the Ulster Farmers Union, and at page 526, you'll see the correspondence from the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs regarding a proposed joint meeting to hear from the Ulster Farmers Union. So, members, I just want to take your views on scheduling that joint meeting with the ERA Committee to hear from UFU. If we do agree to it, it will be held on the 12th of November at 10 a.m. in the Senate chamber. So, members, what's your thoughts?
Tuesday.
Or Tuesday?
What time, sorry?
10. I know it is a sitting day, but
Next week.
yeah, Tuesday next week. I think it is important that we do hear from the UFU and that it is in a joint capacity, because there are overlaps from infrastructure and ERA side of things. So content to go with that, yeah. Okay, thank you, members. Okay, item 10 is subordinate legislation. SL1 is not subject to assembly procedure. Advise members that there's one proposal for statutory rule that is not subject to assembly proceedings and is not required to be led, which begins at page 529. It's SL1, the road speed limit number 5, order Northern Ireland 2024. So I'm asking members if they have any issues they wish to raise on the proposal. Ask members if you're content with the proposal for the statutory rule.
Then.
Yeah. Okay, item 11 is the Northern Ireland Concessionary Fares Scheme, update and written evidence. Page 540 is the update on the Northern Ireland Concessionary Fares Scheme, and at page 543 is written evidence dated the 12th of August from DFI on the outcome of the consultation on the changes to the scheme. Inform members that the Department has provided an update on the introduction of application, renewal and replacement fees for a Smart Pass. These are £20 for 60 plus Smart Pass applicants, which is 60 to 64, and then £12 for senior Smart Pass applicants 65 plus. There will be exemptions for registered blind, or disabled and half fare Smart Pass applicants. The Department intends to use the financial provisions bill currently being prepared by the Department of Finance to make the changes required to the existing legislation. Details of the fees will be subsequently set out in subordinate legislation. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the update, or if there's any information or clarification which they feel needs to be. Yeah, Stephen.
Just a couple of comments, Chair. I think it's worth noting, first of all, the very considerable public interest in this matter. Over 20,000 responses in the consultation, which perhaps is a record for DFI. I think that has to be reflected on. And I do note the disappointment of the introduction of fees to what was a free scheme, when it was introduced back in 2001. And I think it will hit some of our hardest citizens, particularly in light of the winter fuel cuts that we've seen in recent weeks and months. So I would just like to note the disappointment on the direction of travel on this, particularly for the 65 plus fee being introduced.
Okay. Members, any other comments or anything that they want to ask? No, thank you, Stephen, because I know that you have raised this quite a bit in terms of even in the Assembly Chamber and things. So, okay, we'll move on to item 12, which is changing the emissions test for light vehicles with a new diesel engine. Outcome of targeted consultation written evidence. At page 549 is written evidence from DFI on the response to the consultation, and at page 552 synopsis of responses to the consultation. So I remind members that the Department undertook a consultation on changing the emission test for modern light diesel vehicles as part of the MOT test, and the DVA's proposal to introduce PN emissions test to measure the number of particulates in the exhaust emissions. The Department states that 490 responses were received, 487 of which were received anonymously via Citizen Space. The three representative bodies that responded, Alliance Party, Logistics UK and the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, all supported the proposal. Only 18% of the remaining respondents supported the proposals. In its analysis, the Department suggests a lack of support may be reflective of anticipated increased MOT failure rates and associated repair costs for customers, and by the stifling of the practice of bypassing the diesel particulate filter, easy for me to say, and emissions control systems, which the Department points out is illegal. The Department does not anticipate that there will be a fee increase associated with the PN testing. However, it believes that the cost to reintroduce the diesel smoke test, which is relatively ineffective for modern vehicles, is likely to be more significant than the new PN test, and could lead to an increase of MOT test fees, which could potentially affect all MOT customers. So I'm informing members that the results of the consultation will now be considered by the Minister. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the results of the consultation, or if they wish to make any comments or any further information or clarity. Keith?
Yeah, a comment and possibly a question. The 82% is a fairly high negative rate on that, and it has to be said, but it is a fairly high, whether they're all 100% genuine, but there's still an 82% negative rate.
Yeah.
And then a question on page 549, it says here, older light diesel engine vehicles would be subject to a smoke test in newly constructed test centres, which is fair enough, once there is sufficient coverage across the agency's network of test centres. I'm not clear what that means. Does that mean that the new facilities will have the facility to do the smoke test and the other ones won't? And when will they have it? So if you have an older vehicle, and I said earlier I have a diesel car, it was fairly new, but anyway, for the record, if you have an older vehicle, and when we get to Hydebank and test in there, you're going to be at a disadvantage for E.G. Cookstown, who has an older vehicle and can't test. So when are they all going to be across the board level?
Okay.
So it's a wee bit, it's just not clear what that means to me, that's all.
No, it's worth getting it checked out. Happy with
And
that?
I've no issue broadly with that whole thing,
Yeah.
but it's just you can't have two places doing it and the rest,
Yeah.
13 not doing it.
No, absolutely. I think it's worth getting it checked out, and certainly whenever, as you say, there is a high proportion of people who responded, and weren't in favour. So it's worth getting it checked out.
And also, could we check out, sorry, Chair,
Yeah.
to what extent they were carrying out the old test anyway, because it's my understanding that it wasn't being done.
2006,
No.
I think it stopped.
I don't remember ever.
Yeah, they know that they've been in breach
Yeah.
of EU law as a consequence. So now we're changing to do something else from something we weren't doing since it changed to that. So it has to be a change in practice rather than just on paper.
Okay, yeah. Okay, happy? Okay, thank you. 13, item 13 is amendment to Northern Ireland law for people who return to Northern Ireland with an EEA driving licence. Outcome of targeted consultation written evidence at page 563. There's written evidence from DFI on the response to the targeted consultation. And 4 members of the department undertook a targeted consultation to correct a gap in legislation affecting former holders of a NI or GB driving licence who became resident in the European Economic Area and exchanged their licence for an EEA licence and later returned to reside in Northern Ireland. So following the EU exit, the UK government decided to continue to recognise EEA licences. However, the UK is a non-EEA country and domestic legislation does not recognise EEA licences that were issued in exchange for a licence from a non-EEA country. The department therefore undertook a consultation on the proposal to reinstate the rights of residents who hold EEA licences exchanged from an NI or GB licence and provide equivalent recognition rights to other EEA licence holders. So advise members that the department has advised that as the consultation raised no difficulties with the proposal, the Minister is content that the amending regulations should be made. The department has highlighted that the proposal does not constitute a change in policy but is intended to restore to the position that existed prior to the exit from the EU. Similar amending legislation has already been made in GB to close this gap. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the results of the consultation or if they wish to make any comments or any further information or clarity which they may want to get. Keith?
Just 2 questions. Again, one thing contradicts another in this. Page 565, it states, so I presume this is, let's say, a person with a French driver with an EA licence comes over here and can automatically change it for an NA licence for 12 months. That's paragraph 2. Okay, so there are other provisions in NA law which allow an EA licence in exchange. That's fair enough. So that person comes over, gets it for 12 months. So the question is, what happens after 12 months is the first question. Then if you go to page 568, bullet point 2. Bullet point 1, 568, reduce the risk of a driver inadvertently using an EA licence which is not currently recognised in NI law. So I'm not saying the first point's wrong or that's wrong, But I need to be clear, is an EA licence holder today driving an NI fit to drive an NI? I'm not suggesting you know the answer to that.
I think this is to...
I know it is,
Yeah.
but it's still comments, reduce the risk of a driver inadvertently using an EA licence. That's fine. This is an NI person. We'll call NI persons coming back here. But I'm talking about an EU, originally a French citizen coming over here, using the EA licence for 12 months to get an NI licence. But what happens after the 12 months?
Okay, we can get...
You with me?
Yeah.
So I know this is...
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can get it
I know this is
clarified.
specifically about a UK
Yeah.
citizen going out and coming back, but I'm talking about, let's say, a French citizen coming over.
Yeah,
Because it's saying UK is now, in effect, a non-EEA country.
yeah.
So we just need to I need to be clear that an EEA licence holder coming here, you with me?
Yeah, we'll get clarity.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good.
It always makes sense.
So I'm looking at it from the other angle, because it
Yes.
is mentioned in here.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's okay. That's fair enough. Okay, content? Yeah. Okay, so folks, the forward work programme, at page 575, you'll see the draft forward work programme, and I'm seeking agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft forward work programme and reflect any decisions taken today. So item 15 is... Oh, sorry, you all agree to that?
I know we
Sorry.
probably will get, Chair, more info, but just for my own sake, next week then, Moyola 10, is that correct?
Yeah,
10
I'm just
a.m. up
about
there.
to, well, I'm just about to
Maybe
read it
come
out
to that,
here.
aye, dead on, great.
So
Thanks.
we'll come to that now, because I know everybody's very excited to get out to Moyola. It'll be a good session, I think.
I have buns ordered, Chair.
Oh, very good. Get your orders in then to Keith.
It's a joke.
Absolutely, I could just read through that, and I thought you were going to ask a question.
I ain't gonna have much appetite.
Okay. Item 15 is any other business. So I'm asking members if they've any other items of business that they wish to raise at this moment in time. No? Okay. So item 16 is the date, time and location of the next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 11 a.m. On Wednesday the 13th of November in Moyola Water Treatment Works, and will be preceded by a tour of the facility, which commences at 10. So it is 10. It is 10 a.m.
Grab the bones, alright, let's just get the meeting right, and then we'll work on whatever we get.
So it is 10 a.m, but we will have the tour first at 10 a.m, and then the actual meeting will take place then. Okay. So informing members that the meeting will now move into a closed session. So I'm seeking a members' agreement that we now move into closed session, and I'm seeking agreement that the Dallo can remain in the public gallery for the closed session. All content?
Yep.
Okay.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.